Well, hello there, and welcome to another winter Bible study. This is our second one in the series, They Say, You Say, I Say. We're looking at self-talk and how God influences that self-talk, and we're taking different Bible characters who have a pretty negative self-talk and watching them just grow and flourish because of it. Something we all want to do. Today's character has a very grand role in the history of God's people. If it were not for her, the politics of Babylon would have annihilated the Hebrew people living in Persia. Can you guess who the Shy Orphan is? If you guessed Esther, you are correct, and congratulations, attendees of the Zoom meeting last Saturday, you are right. Well, the book of Esther stands out for several reasons. One, because it does not speak of God. The German theologian Martin Luther took offense to this and refused to translate it into German. And another reason is that because it is a story of deliverance, Adolf Hitler refused to let anyone carry the book of Esther under penalty of death. But another theologian in Spain, Maimonides, said that this was the most important book in the Bible after the first 5 books of the Torah. So let's look at this book and look at the Shy Orphan to see how she influenced Jewish history with her life. The first question I want to ask goes back, what did they say about the Jews in Persia? And everyone's self-talk begins with their family's place in society. So the Jews in Persia at this point is after the exile. Now the exile happened 600 years before Christ, and then they spent a time there, a few generations there, and then they went back. They were released from slavery, but a lot of the Jews stayed. They had found a good living there, and that's where Mordecai's family was. Mordecai's uncle and aunt die, and his cousin Esther is taken into Mordecai's family. Now, Esther is not her true name. Her true name is Hadassah, and we would say in English, Myrtle. So her true name is Myrtle, and Mordecai hid her true name and her Hebrew tradition, her Hebrew heritage. And if you think about that, it was probably because the people in Babylon didn't like the Jews. So they say Jews were not worthy of being a full part of society. With Esther hiding her true nature, hiding her true name, I wonder how hard it was for her at school. An orphan first, no parents, and then having to hide her heritage. But God said something different. God said, you are beautiful. And though God doesn't speak in Esther, God does make Esther's beauty. We know that. And it's that beauty that elevates her to a position where she never could have dreamed of being as a shy orphan. In the drama, Esther is given a place in the harem of the king. Now he's looking for a new bride, and she takes the position for a year, taking beauty treatments and possibly becoming one of the brides of the king. And the king is watching her and becoming enamored by her and deeply falls in love with her because of her beauty and her grace and the way she treats other people, other of the women in the harem. And meanwhile, Mordecai, her cousin, is sitting at the gate where the men talk politics, and he happens to overhear a plot to kill the king. Being a good citizen, he passes this forward to one of the officials, and the plot fails. But Mordecai doesn't get recognized at that time. Mordecai also finds out that there's a man by the name of Haman who's going to make it difficult for the people by insisting that everybody bow down to him as a top politician. Everybody must bow down to him when he passes by. But Mordecai is a good Jewish man. In fact, he's the first person the Bible ever calls a Jew. So he really elevates the tradition of being Jewish in this and many other ways through this book. So he says, I'm not going to bow down to you. I only bow down in my religion, in my faith. And so Haman is mad and decides, okay, since you didn't follow the law to bow down to me, you're going to die. And also the other Jews in the city will die. Mordecai is devastated and goes into mourning and insists that all the Jews in Susa go there too, go to mourning. And when he doesn't appear at the gate, because mourners can't come to the gate, Esther wonders why. Why hasn't he appeared at the gate? And so Esther sends her attendant to find out why, and Mordecai says to her that she must speak to the king. She must speak to the king. And though she's very fearful of this, she sends back her attendant the second time and says that she cannot do this because it's not her time to speak to the king. She has a time once a month, and this is not her time. But Mordecai says to Esther, and I want to read this passage, the 13th and 14th verse in chapter 4 of Esther, because this is key. And I want you to listen for truth, faith, and calling while I read this. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, saying, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace for any more than all the Jews. For you, if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Okay, you hear several things in there. First of all, the truth is that if you whether or not you speak to the king, your Jewish heritage will come out and you will be killed like the rest of the Jews. And second, the faith, Esther, if you don't speak, God will raise up another one. Relief and deliverance will arise from another place. That's faith. And yet who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I have used that phrase, for such a time as this, several times in my ministry to help someone who is shy, who is uncertain, timid, to move forward in their calling. One time at annual conference, a clergy person who was assigned the task of chair of daily proceedings had a hard time stepping into that pulpit and presiding over the 1,000 people that are in the room. It was a contentious debate that year, and I said, listen, you've come for such a time as this. And she knew exactly what I was talking about. And she stood up and shook it off and got in the pulpit and was very good at what she was doing. Let us never doubt that the Word of God can inspire people around us and us. So Esther does figure out how to entice the king to have a visit. And in the visit, he's in love with her, right? And he wants to give her anything she wants. And she says, well, I want to have a dinner with you and Haman. And her plan is to speak to the king about her heritage in front of Haman. And so that's going to be arranged, a 2-day feast with Haman. And that night in between, the king can't sleep and asks for some reports to be sent to his room. And he starts going through these reports, and he finds out that there was a plot to kill him, and that Mordecai was the one who brought that to the attention of the officials. So in the first day of the dinner, Haman is sitting there with her and the king, And the king speaks to Haman and says, what would you do if someone, had found out that I was to be killed and had done something to prevent that? And Haman says, well, I parade them around and, have the top prince lead the horse that the man is on. And he goes, exactly. Please go call for a horse and you go lead Mordecai around, for he is the one who has saved my life. Well, that didn't sit well with Haman, but that was day one. Now on day two, the king's been asking a question, and that's why Esther has to speak in the next chapter. The king has been saying, well, what do you want? I'll give you half of my kingdom. And so the day two, Queen Esther answers and speaks. And this is what she says in chapter 7, 3 and 4, very key verses. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. And we have been sold. If we had been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate the king for this loss. And the king asked, well, who did this? Who's going to kill your people? Now, it was a very eclectic society. There were many, many different nationalities, heritages in this society, much like our own. And Esther points to Haman and said, this wicked Haman did this. And the king is so mad that he marches out of the room. And Haman realizes that he's not going to get the king's favor now. But he begs Queen Esther, and she's lounging on a little sofa there. And he falls on his face, and it looks like he's trying to attack the queen when the king walks back in. And that just sent the king over the top. Haman is headed for the gallows that he made for Mordecai. And then the king gives Esther and Mordecai the signet ring and says, you go ahead and make any laws you want so that your people are never harmed again. And those laws included the dying of Haman's family, and the people in all of the provinces, 127 provinces, the Jews were able to turn things around. In fact, as you look at this, chapter 9, verse 1 says, now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. And on that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. The opposite occurred, that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. Now just take a moment and listen to this story. This shy orphan strategically approached powerful men, made her case with humility and grace, and like the point of the fulcrum, she pivoted her life and the life of her entire people, and she became one of the most powerful women in Persia, and her cousin guardian, also a man to be feared. The Jews remember this to this day with a party called Purim, a two-day festival that celebrates their deliverance. It's a story of the peaceable kingdom. The remainder of the Jews in the king's province gathered together and protected their lives and had rest from their enemies. In the first chapter of Esther, we see the king having a big party, and he invites all the people into the protected walls of his garden, his palace garden. And it didn't matter how wealthy you were, how famous you were, what position you held in the government. Everybody was told to just eat and drink at their heart's content. There were no limits, he said, to the festivities. And when he looked for his wife and for his friends to to do the same thing, he was disappointed. They were not. But he found that same kind of love and generosity in Esther and her people. And that's why in this story, they are allowed to survive and even thrive. The peaceable kingdom where God's love is the rule of the day. Listen to this very last sentence in the whole book of Esther, chapter 10, verse 3. For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by a multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. A beautiful story. Her, I say, after that, was Queen Esther. That's who she became and stayed as. Now, what about you? What is your I say? Thank you for listening to our commentary on Esther. You may have some thoughts to share. I would welcome your attendance at our 9 a.m. Zoom call. Next week, I will share the story of a young person who believed he was the weakest person in the weakest family. His triumph over his self-talk is truly inspiring. Please join us again for They Say, You Say, I Say. This is Pastor Nancy. I've enjoyed being with you.